A healthy walnut tree is a magnificent sight to see. When trees in a well-managed orchard receive optimal amount of water and nutrients and protection of pests, each tree will have a bountiful harvest.
Is there a right way to grow walnuts to achieve these consistent, bountiful harvests? Top agronomists in both private industry and universities are saying yes, especially when it comes to managing the very important nutrient nitrogen.
Of course, proper walnut tree nutrition is complex and involves more than just nitrogen fertilization. Other nutrients, including potassium, zinc, and boron, are also essential and are often applied in walnut production.
Lately, there's been a lot of attention paid to nitrogen and nitrate, the form that can leach into groundwater. Many groundwater basins in the Central Valley are contaminated with nitrate at levels exceeding safe drinking water standards.
The State Water Board is responding by adopting a nitrate control program that will affect each industry in California where nitrogen is used as an input or waste discharge contains the nutrient. Testing of groundwater basins in the Central Valley is finding that some portion of the contamination is attributable to applications to irrigated cropland of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, composts, and animal manures. Other nitrate sources are also identified: livestock, wastewater treatment plants, and natural sources.
Agronomists have devised a management approach for optimizing applications of nitrogen to crops to minimize leaching of excess nitrate while optimizing crop production. The approach is called the 4 R's: the right rate, right time, right place, and right source. For walnuts, the University of California, with support from the California Department of Food and Agriculture and the California Walnut Board, has spent years refining the 4 R's and now has proven practices ready to be used today in California walnuts.
Before going into details on the 4 R's, it's important to understand the relationship between soils, nitrogen fertilizing, and irrigation practices. In particular, how nitrate moves in the soil and how it is taken up by a tree, essentially how all the biology turns into the management implications and tools.
A fundamental point to remember: any nitrogen source can convert to nitrate and eventually leach beyond the root zone and into groundwater aquifers. Other factors are in play with nitrate, such as mineralization, losses to the atmosphere, and biological processes. But leaching excess nitrate to groundwater is a major focus these days and deserves much attention.
First, we have to understand why nitrogen is important for plants. Plants use more nitrogen than any other nutrient.
For walnuts, 80% of nitrogen goes into proteins used for the developing nuts.
Nitrogen is used in the tree's DNA and in hormones that signal the plant to perform certain functions, such as cell division. Nitrogen is also critical for chloroplasts, which are the tree's sugar-making factories, and nitrogen is the source of the tree's defense compounds. When nitrogen is deficient in the tree, it can limit growth and cause leaf chlorosis. However, it's rare to see a nitrogen-deficient walnut orchard. More often, we see high nitrogen levels, which can cause excessive vegetative growth.
When planting a new orchard, especially in rich soils, it's important to perform a soil test to ensure the correct amount of nitrogen is available to the new trees. Additional nitrogen applications may not be needed until the tree starts showing significant growth.
Keep in mind that too much nitrogen in young orchards in particular can delay leaf drop in the fall, which delays the tree's transition to dormancy. This can leave a tree vulnerable to winter kill or frost damage. Excess nitrogen fertilization can also lead to increased disease susceptibility. So a key component of the 4 R's is the right amount of nitrogen.
Research has shown that on average, an orchard needs about 29 pounds of nitrogen per acre for every ton of in-shell walnuts harvested. Researchers came up with that number by analyzing the nitrogen content in the nuts and shells and by measuring the amount of nitrogen in the tree structure itself.
The orchard uses that 29 pounds of nitrogen fairly evenly throughout the growing season, starting at leaf out and continuing up to harvest. We want the right amount in the tree, when the tree needs it, and where it can get it.
To help understand how to manage nitrogen applications, It's important to understand the different forms of nitrogen in the soil and how the tree takes up nitrogen. There are basically three forms of nitrogen in the soil: soil organic matter, ammonium, and nitrate. Soil organic matter is the nutrient storage bank in your soil.
In the short term, organic matter nitrogen is tied up in big, complex organic molecules that are not immediately available to plants. But over time, this organic matter breaks down and provides a steady supply of ammonium and nitrate to the soil and the roots. Ammonium and nitrate are the forms of nitrogen that roots can take up. Being positively charged, ammonium can stick to soil particles, which are predominantly negatively charged, and hence does not leach easily.
Nitrate is the other form of nitrogen that roots can take up from the soil. However, nitrate is negatively charged, so it cannot stick to soil particles, making it susceptible to leaching. As a reminder, when we talk about the cation exchange capacity in soils, we mean the ability of a soil to temporarily hold on to positively charged molecules. Ammonium is one of those positively charged molecules typically found in soil.
How do these forms of nitrogen cycle in the soil? Let's start with soil organic matter. As soil organic matter is broken down by soil microbes, it releases ammonium. In warm, moist soils, this can occur in a matter of weeks to months, while in cold soils, below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, this can be a very slow process. Because this process is driven by microbial activity in the soil, it is very complex. As with all biological processes, it happens faster when moisture is present, when there is oxygen for microbes to use, and when temperatures are warmer. When you apply organic matter, such as compost, you stimulate microbial action, and these microbes require nitrogen and carbohydrates.
If the compost is less than 2% nitrogen, any nitrogen is going to be tied up by those microbes for a period of time until those microbes die. So, in organic systems, or if compost is applied as a supplement to conventional fertilizer, it's important to understand the nitrogen content of the compost, since its availability to the plant can be delayed until the compost breaks down.
Once nitrogen is in the ammonium form, it can then turn into nitrate through a process called nitrification. Nitrification is also microbe-driven, so the rate at which this occurs depends primarily on temperature. In California soils, during the growing season, nitrification happens in a matter of days to weeks.
As a consequence of this rapid microbial action, the nitrogen in soil organic matter converts to ammonium, which turns into nitrate and is leachable if it's not taken up by the tree. The same goes for fertilizer urea. It quickly converts to ammonium, which also turns into nitrate, which can leach if it's not taken up by the tree.
So how does nitrogen in organic matter and ammonium turn into nitrate? How fast does this happen? At 50 degrees Fahrenheit, it takes 4 weeks for 40% of the ammonium present to convert into nitrate. At around 60 degrees, in the top 2 to 3 inches of soil, 60% of ammonium that you apply will turn into nitrate in 2 weeks if it's not taken up by the plants. And at 75 degrees, it only takes 2 weeks for 100% of the ammonium to turn into nitrate.
Now let's talk about how nitrogen moves in the tree. Nitrogen uptake in trees is regulated by a number of biological factors. One principle to understand is that a tree will limit nitrogen uptake when it gets beyond what it needs. You can overapply beyond what is needed, but there's a point of diminishing returns in that the roots will not take up all that's applied.
As applications increase, you eventually reach a plateau, and uptake maxes out. It gets to a bottleneck stage where it's hard to get more nitrogen into the tree, which all means that more nitrogen applied does not necessarily mean more nitrogen is taken up.
All this biology about how nitrogen behaves in the soil and in trees has to be translated into practices for managing a walnut orchard. Let's start with the right rate. Applying the right rate is about matching nitrogen supply with the nitrogen tree demand.
That demand is all the nutrients a tree needs to build the harvested nut, husk, hull, leaves, and twigs. This is our supply side: cover crops, manure, compost, the nitrate in irrigation water, and synthetic nitrogen fertilizer.
Before we go on, let's talk a minute about nitrate in irrigation well water, or as it's being called, pump and fertilize. Years of research has shown that this nitrate is available for plants to absorb and use just like any other source of nitrogen. An inexpensive well test can tell you exactly how much nitrate is in your irrigation water. Here's how to do the math. Take the test results, say 35 parts per million, and multiply by 0.225. That equals 7.875 pounds of nitrogen per acre inch of water. If you apply 36 acre inches or 3 acre feet of water during the growing season, the total is 283.5 pounds of nitrogen per acre each year. There's one more step. You need to multiply that 283 pounds times the crop nitrogen use efficiency and efficiency of your irrigation system. As a rough estimate, let's use 70% efficiency for both. At 35 parts per million and 70% efficiency, you should include about 198 pounds of nitrogen per acre in your overall nitrogen budget just from your irrigation water. Think of it this way, that's 198 pounds of free nitrogen applied to your crop. Better yet, you are helping clean up the groundwater aquifer.
Some of the nitrogen that isn't used by the tree can cycle in the soil, but generally, any excess nitrate is susceptible to leaching into groundwater. Keep in mind that a walnut tree is regulating its nitrogen uptake, since there is an energy cost to the tree to take up nitrogen.
If we apply more than a tree needs, it's not going to expend extra energy to take up nitrogen it doesn't need. Translated to a management practice, this means spoon feeding or applying smaller amounts over multiple applications. The more split applications, the better.
So how did we arrive at the right rate? In 2012, a 3-year research project was funded by the California Walnut Board and the California Department of Food and Agriculture to study orchards in the northern, central, and southern Central Valley. The varieties studied were Chandler and Tulare. Analyses were taken of those orchards throughout the growing season. Monthly samples of nitrogen content of leaves, fruit, trunk, scaffolds, and roots. Samples were taken from 10 trees at each site over 3 years. When averaged over all 6 sites over 3 years, the result was 29 pounds of nitrogen was removed in every ton of in-shell nuts. So our right rate is about 29 pounds per ton of nuts.
While we don't consider this to be an official nitrogen removed number for walnuts used for regulatory purposes, you should consider it a baseline number to build your nitrogen budget. For a mature orchard, add another 5 to 7 pounds per acre for tree growth, which gets us to about 35 pounds per ton of nuts.
Now let's talk about the right time. Keep in mind that trees have biological bottlenecks called transporters that control the nitrogen uptake into the trees. Applying at the right time is about matching the timing of tree demand with root uptake.
Because it takes energy to take up nutrients, a tree will do it when they need those nutrients. When we look at the growing season between leaf out and harvest, May, June, July, and August, it gives us an idea of how much nitrogen will eventually become 1 ton of nuts.
What our studies found was nitrogen uptake was fairly even from May through August. The monthly average nitrogen uptake is 24%, 25%, 25%, and 26%. Because tree demand is uniform throughout the growing season, this informs us on how to split our nitrogen application. Applying even amounts over the course of the growing season goes a long way to increase your nitrogen use efficiency, increasing tree uptake, and minimizing nitrate leaching.
Several studies have shown that root growth begins in April. We also know that nitrogen used by the trees when growth starts pushing all comes from storage in the tree structure. So it's not worth applying nitrogen this early because roots are not taking up nitrogen yet, leaving it to potentially being leached by rain or irrigation. The same can be said for applying nitrogen in September or later.
One of the best tools to guide your decisions about the right amount and the right time is through leaf analysis. Leaf sampling results can provide valuable information for a rational, plant-based fertilization program. Walnut growers have been using leaf nutrient analysis for more than 20 years to check tree nitrogen status, typically pulling leaf samples in July. For most varieties, that's usually too late to make any substantial adjustments in nitrogen applications before the crop matures.
The University of California recently completed supporting research for leaf samples taken in May. Having the results early enables growers to react quickly by either holding off additional nitrogen applications if nitrogen levels are adequate, or adding fertilizer if a deficiency is apparent.
These new critical nitrogen values for May leaf sampling are now posted on a calculator in CropManage, an interactive website developed by the University of California where your lab results can be compared to appropriate ranges. The May leaf sampling can be easily done following a few simple steps.
Once the foliage has developed and nuts are about 25% of normal size, select a healthy shoot that does not have any nutlets. That's called a non-fruiting spur. You also want a leaf that is in the sunlight at least part of the day. Ideally, you select a fully exposed terminal leaflet, although that can be hard to find in a mature orchard. What you're collecting is the terminal leaflet, not the full walnut leaf, but just the terminal end.
When collecting leaf samples, think of your tree as a pie split into 4 quarters. Collect 1 terminal leaflet per quarter for a total of 4 terminal leaflets per tree. Select trees that are at least 30 yards apart for a total of at least 29 trees in an orchard if there is a similar soil type throughout the field. If there are dramatically different soil types, subdivide the orchard into blocks based on the soil type and take 29 leaf samples from each area.
Put all of your leaflets in a paper bag, label the bag with an orchard identification, and send them to your nutrient analysis lab of choice as quickly as possible. If temperatures are warm, keep the leaf samples in an ice chest. Instruct the lab to analyze for nitrogen and also the other key elements of phosphorus and potassium. Results from all of these nutrients in combination will better guide recommendations if changes in applications are needed. Once you receive the leaf sample results, the nitrogen values can be entered into CropManage. Also include results for other nutrients into your CropManage worksheet.
If using July samples, remember that the range you're shooting for is 2.3 to 2.7% nitrogen. While walnut trees generally respond with more crop and vigor as leaf nitrogen climbs to 2.3%, beyond 2.3%, you don't see much value. There aren't increased yields beyond that level, nor is there increased tree health. In fact, beyond 2.7%, there are negative impacts, such as too much vegetative growth. Again, the ideal range is 2.3 to 2.7% leaf nitrogen. Leaf sampling results can refine your yield-based nitrogen management strategy to better make sure that your right rate, right time, right place, and right source meet the needs of your crop.
So where is the right place to apply nitrogen fertilizer? Applying in the right place means knowing where the majority of roots are located so they can best take up nutrients and water. Next time you see a walnut orchard that has been removed, look closely at where all the roots are located below the soil level. Typically, the vast majority of important feeder roots are in the top 2 to 3 feet of soil. Roots will be shallower in young trees, and root depth will change as a tree grows.
A recent detailed study of root growth and distribution found that the active root zone for both nitrogen and irrigation water is in the upper 3 feet. Walnuts planted in rich river-bottom soils will, however, have some roots down to 8, 9, 10 feet, and those roots can be valuable for absorbing water in dry periods, but they are not critical for the bulk of nutrient uptake.
So it's in that upper zone where you want to keep your water and nutrient applications. And remember, nitrate moves with water, so if you push water below the root zone, you risk pushing nitrate below the root zone also. Root distribution in an orchard can vary dramatically if you compare tree-to-tree sprinklers and flood irrigation to high-efficiency systems such as microsprinklers or double-line drip. The point is this: the active roots will always be in the same location that the irrigation water is applied.
That is why fertigation, injecting fertilizer during irrigations, is the most efficient method when using high-efficiency systems. When watering with tree-to-tree sprinklers or flood irrigation, broadcast applications can do the job. And speaking of fertigation, always inject the fertilizer at the last half or quarter of an irrigation set, stopping the injection 10 to 15 minutes before the set is finished to ensure the system is adequately flushed.
The right source is about preventing the applied nitrogen from converting too quickly into nitrate and leaching beyond the roots. Again, nitrate is negatively charged and can move through the soil very easily, so keep that in mind when choosing nitrogen fertilizer and managing that fertilizer application. There is a lot more that goes into selecting the right source. In particular, how much do you want to spend per acre? What application method is used? Broadcast or fertigation through sprinklers or drip?
There are many nitrogen fertilizer product options, but each has its own baggage. Calcium nitrate is a readily available form of N, but also has a high leaching potential. This leaching potential can be managed with well-timed applications, and calcium nitrate is well suited to fertigation systems. The calcium in calcium nitrate can also be helpful for tree health. Urea ammonium nitrate, UAN, is very popular due to its solubility. The mixture of N forms makes this a slightly less leachable form of N, although in warm spring and summer conditions the conversion to nitrate is very rapid. There are lots of reasons why you're making fertilizer choices, but always keep in mind the vulnerability inherent with each choice.
Finally, let's pull together a right rate, time, place, and source into one calculation.
First, you have to consider the yield history of each orchard, the current year's growing conditions, conditions at bloom, and use that information to develop a realistic yield potential. Let's say a 3-ton crop. We're going to assume a 70% nitrogen use efficiency to get nitrogen into the tree. Our projected yield is 3 tons per acre times 29 pounds per ton divided by that 70% efficiency factor. That equals 124 pounds of nitrogen per acre applied during the growing season to meet tree demand. That's our rate.
Then we get into the time. We know that the growing fruit is the biggest nitrogen demander.
This demand is fairly even over the growing season, but in the first month, growth comes from nitrogen stored in the tree.
So we're looking at even applications, May through August. You can just divide that 124 pounds per acre by 4, which equals 31 pounds per acre each month. This amount should include the amount of nitrate in your irrigation water, nitrogen from any applied compost, plus fertilizer nitrogen that is applied. If there is residual nitrogen in the soil from prior years, that should also be considered. Then we are managing our irrigation to keep most of our water in the top 3 feet.
Here is a summary of the takeaways from this session. 29 pounds of nitrogen for every ton of nuts that you plan on harvesting. Apply the nitrogen evenly over the course of the growing season. Don't put on more nitrogen than the plant is taking up and using. Be mindful of the amount of water applied in irrigations during and after fertilizer applications. Too much water can push excess nitrates past the root zone. In this example with drip or micro sprinklers, apply nitrogen in the last quarter of the set so the fertilizer isn't pushed past the root zone. With flood irrigation, it's harder to control the amount of water applied and movement of nitrate past the root zone. When applying compost or manure, remember these materials need time to mineralize and convert to ammonium, making it plant available. A rule of thumb for compost is that about 40% is available in the first year after application, another 30% the following year, then the balance is released across several years. Compost averages about 3 to 4% of nitrogen content. So if you apply 4 tons per acre, nitrogen available the first year would be about 96 pounds per acre. And remember, availability of the nitrogen from compost is very temperature dependent. Where possible, incorporate compost or manure soon after application. When choosing a commercial nitrogen fertilizer, consider how much and when the nitrogen is available for plant uptake. Ask your supplier or crop advisor for the best material for your conditions and soil type.
Following these simple steps will go a long way toward increasing your nitrogen use efficiency. and decreasing nitrate leaching to groundwater.
Best of all, it ensures you get the most value from an expensive crop input, and in this market, saving every dollar counts.